Every day, we say that we make decisions. But what does it really mean to decide? Life senses its environment and makes choices in order to survive. Humans give meaning to those choices, and AI reasons over vast amounts of information to generate answers. Life, meaning, intelligence. At first glance, these may seem like separate worlds, yet they are all connected by a single question. That question is decision. In this series, we will explore the philosophical questions of what is life, what is meaning, and what is intelligence, and through them, examine the true nature of decision-making in the age of AI. So, what does it actually mean to make a decision? Today's generative AI can produce remarkably natural answers by drawing on vast amounts of knowledge. But generating an answer is not the same as making a decision. A decision is not simply about selecting the most probable answer. It is about understanding the situation, considering the objective, and choosing a single course of action from multiple possibilities. And every decision carries a reason, produces a consequence, and comes with responsibility. In other words, decision-making is not merely information processing. It is the act of making a meaningful choice. Understanding the structure of decision-making is the key to understanding life, understanding humanity, and ultimately, understanding AI itself. What, then, is the structure of a decision? In our daily lives, we constantly make choices, yes or no, A or B, proceed or stop. But these branches themselves are not what define a decision. A true decision is the act of determining a direction for the future, based on a purpose, a set of values, and the specific situation and context in which we find ourselves. Every decision has a reason behind it, and every decision carries responsibility for its consequences. In other words, a decision is not merely a branching point, it is a commitment to the future, an act that carries meaning. From this perspective, decision-making is no longer just information processing. It becomes the very essence of intelligence, connecting humans, life, and AI. If decision-making were nothing more than information processing, then everyone would arrive at the same conclusion from the same information. But that is not how the real world works. Even when people are presented with the same data, they often reach different decisions. One person may decide to act immediately, while another may believe it is wiser to wait. Why does this happen? Because decisions are not determined by information alone. Each person brings different experiences, different values, different goals, and different perspectives to the world. Our emotions, our circumstances, and even our expectations for the future all influence the decisions we make. In other words, even when the information is the same, the meaning we derive from it is different. A decision is not about the information itself. It is about the meaning we assign to that information and the future we choose to create. So, what is it that creates these differences? The answer is meaning. Information consists of facts and data that exist in the external world. But information alone does not lead to a decision. We interpret information through the lens of our own experiences, values, goals, and the situations in which we find ourselves. Only then does information become meaningful, and it is from that meaning that we choose how to act toward the future. That is what we call a decision. In other words, decisions do not emerge directly from information. Information becomes meaning, and meaning leads to decision. This is the fundamental structure of human intelligence, and, we believe, the intelligence of the AI era. So, what exactly is meaning? This question has been at the heart of philosophy long before the emergence of AI. How do words and symbols come to have meaning? And how is that meaning connected to the world? Philosophical semantics is not simply the study of dictionary definitions. It explores the relationship between symbols and the world, between human consciousness and experience, and the meaning that emerges from them. Why can the same word be understood differently by different people? Why can the same event carry different meanings for different individuals? Through questions like these, philosophy has continually sought to understand the nature of meaning, and this question has not become obsolete in the age of AI. On the contrary, now that AI processes vast amounts of information, understanding meaning has become more important than ever. It is the key to understanding decision-making itself. For centuries, philosophy has sought to understand meaning by analyzing the structure of words and symbols. One of the most influential approaches is formal semantics. By precisely defining the relationships between symbols and applying logic and truth conditions, it attempts to describe how meaning is represented. Today's AI is also remarkably capable of manipulating symbols and structured representations. It can reason, perform complex calculations, and maintain logical consistency. But the ability to manipulate symbols is not the same as understanding meaning. We experience meaning because we live through experience, embodiment, relationships with others, and the contexts in which we exist. Meaning emerges, evolves, and grows through our relationship with the world. That is why formal structures provide an essential foundation for meaning, but they cannot fully explain meaning on their own. This perspective offers a new starting point for exploring what it truly means to make a decision in the age of AI. So, where does meaning come from? The key is purpose. We do not simply observe the world. We look at it for a reason. We act for a reason. It is this purpose that gives the same information different meanings. For example, when we are hungry, food suddenly becomes meaningful. For a physician, a single symptom can become a critical clue for diagnosis. For a researcher, a small inconsistency may become the starting point of a new discovery. In other words, meaning does not reside in information itself. It emerges from the relationship between information and purpose. Purpose shapes how we perceive the world, influences how we act, and ultimately gives rise to our decisions. That is why, to truly understand decision, it is not enough to understand information alone. We must also understand the question, for what purpose? Now, let us redefine what we mean by decision. A decision is not simply about making a choice. It is the process of perceiving the state of the world, understanding one's own internal state, and interpreting that situation in light of a purpose. In other words, a decision emerges from the intersection of three elements: the external world, our internal state, and our purpose. The external world alone cannot produce a decision. Purpose alone cannot produce a decision. Information alone is not enough. Meaning alone is not enough. A decision comes into being only when the world, the self, and a purpose directed toward the future are brought together. At that moment, we commit to a direction for the future and begin to act. That is why a decision is not merely an act of choosing. It is an act of creating meaning. And this capacity to generate meaning provides a common principle for understanding life, humanity, and AI from a unified perspective. But is this ability to create meaning unique to human beings? As we explore this question more deeply, we arrive at an even more fundamental one. What is life? In 1944, the physicist Erwin Schrödinger confronted this question in his influential book, What is Life? The question he asked was this: how can living organisms maintain their own order in a universe where entropy is constantly increasing? Life continuously takes in matter, energy, and information from the outside world, while preserving its own internal order. At the same time, it continually sustains its own identity. In other words, life is an open system that remains in constant interaction with the world, continuously creating and maintaining both order and self. And when we begin to understand life in this way, the question of decision takes on a whole new meaning. When we understand life in this way, we see that life is far more than a collection of physical matter. Life receives information from the external world and transforms that information into meaning for itself. It then acts based on that meaning, and by responding to the consequences of its actions, it continually sustains itself. Through sight, hearing, touch, and other senses, life perceives the world. It connects what it perceives with memory, experience, values, and purpose to create meaning. Then it moves, communicates, chooses, and interacts with its environment. Within this continuous cycle, life maintains its own existence. In other words, life is a system that engages with the world through information, creates meaning, takes action, and continually preserves itself. And within this process, we can see the fundamental prototype of decision. Now, let us look at the activity of life through the lens of decision. As long as life exists, it is constantly making decisions. It begins by receiving stimuli from the external world: light, sound, temperature, scent, the presence of others. The world is always interacting with living beings. Next, life perceives those stimuli and recognizes what is happening in the present moment. But it does not stop there. Drawing on past experiences, memories, its current physical state, and its fundamental purpose of living, it assigns meaning to the information it receives. It is this very moment, the moment meaning is created, that constitutes a decision. Life then acts on that decision and learns from the outcome. That learning shapes future decisions, allowing life to adapt, evolve, and grow within its environment. In other words, life is a continuous process of receiving information, creating meaning, taking action, and learning. To live is, in essence, to engage in an endless sequence of decisions. This way of thinking has also been carried forward in modern biology. Paul Nurse, who was awarded the 2001 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine, describes life as a system that processes information. Life receives information from its environment and from the state of its own body. It integrates that information, makes decisions, and translates those decisions into action. It then takes in the results of those actions, maintaining itself while continuously adapting to its environment. Certainly, life manages information, but information is not its ultimate purpose. Life does not exist for the sake of information. Information is a means of sustaining life, to preserve itself, remain in harmony with its environment, and move toward a better future. Life makes use of information. The essence of life, therefore, is not the accumulation of information, It is the transformation of information into meaning, meaning into decisions, and decisions into action. Here again, we find decision at the very heart of life itself. But this raises another important question. Why does life use information in the first place? A new perspective on this question was offered by the cognitive scientist Terrence Deacon. In The Symbolic Species, Deacon argues that life is a meaning-making process, and that meaning arises from absence. We become aware of what is not here, what is missing, what has not yet been realized, what may exist in the future. It is because we sense this absence that we begin to ask, why is it needed? From that question, meaning emerges. Meaning gives rise to purpose, and purpose leads to action. In other words, life does not simply react to information. It uses information to imagine the future and to act toward bringing into existence a state that does not yet exist. From this perspective, decision is far more than information processing. It is the process of recognizing absence, creating meaning, and choosing actions that move us toward the future. So, what kind of existence is life? To answer this question, the biologist Francisco Varela proposed the concept of autopoiesis, the idea of self-creation. Life is not merely something that reacts to its environment. It is a system that continuously maintains its own structure while interacting with the world and continually recreating itself. Through its relationship with the environment, it preserves the boundary that defines what it is, while constantly renewing itself. In other words, life is not a finished entity. It is an ongoing process of becoming. What is important here is that this process of self-creation does not take place in isolation from the world. Life receives information through its relationship with the world, creates meaning, acts on that meaning, and in doing so, continually sustains itself. Life, therefore, is not only continuously creating itself, it is also continuously creating its relationship with the world. From this perspective, decision is not a one-time act of judgment. It is the ongoing activity through which life continually renews the relationship between itself and the world. The ideas we have explored so far also resonate deeply with Eastern philosophy. In Zen, the concept of emptiness, or sunyata, holds a central place. But emptiness does not mean that nothing exists. Rather, it expresses the idea that nothing possesses a fixed, independent essence. Everything exists through relationships and is in a constant state of change. That is why meaning does not exist inherently within objects or information. Meaning emerges from the situation of the moment and from the relationship between ourselves and the world. When the observer changes, meaning changes. When our purpose changes, the world appears differently. And as our relationships evolve, new meanings come into being. This resonates deeply with the idea we have been exploring, that information gives rise to meaning, and meaning gives rise to decision. A decision, therefore, is not about selecting a fixed answer. It is the ongoing process of creating new meaning through our relationship with the world. In Zen, this web of relationships is known as engi, often translated as dependent origination. It is the idea that nothing exists independently on its own. Everything comes into being through the convergence of countless conditions and relationships. The same is true of decision. A decision is not something that occurs entirely within an individual. It emerges through the interaction of many elements: the state of the body, the surrounding environment, our purpose, our relationships with others, and the flow of time from the past toward the future. When these elements come together to form a living context, a decision emerges. In other words, decision-making is not simply an event that takes place inside the brain. It is a phenomenon that arises through our relationship with the world. That is why a decision is not about finding a fixed answer. It is the process through which new meaning emerges as body, environment, purpose, relationships, and time, all these interconnected conditions, come together. So far, we have explored the nature of decision through the perspectives of life, philosophy, and Zen. But what happens when we look at AI through the same lens? Today's AI can process enormous amounts of information. It can also generate remarkably natural responses that often surprise us. But as we have seen, decision is more than information processing or answer generation. It involves having a purpose, creating meaning through a relationship with the situation, and choosing actions that move toward a desired future based on that meaning. Together, these are what we have called decision. So, can AI truly possess a purpose? Can it genuinely create meaning? Can it choose its own future? These questions do not yet have simple answers. But one thing is clear. To understand AI, it is not enough to study the model alone. We must also ask how AI creates meaning through its relationships, how it makes decisions, and how it acts in the world. Looking at AI from this perspective offers a new starting point for understanding intelligence in the age of AI. So far, we have explored the question, what is decision, from the perspectives of life, philosophy, semantics, and Zen. Along the way, one insight has become increasingly clear. A decision is not merely a choice. It begins by receiving information. That information is transformed into meaning. Meaning gives rise to action, and the results of those actions are received once again, learned from, and carried forward into future decisions. This continuous cycle is what we call decision. Information is updated through learning. Learning creates new ways of interpreting meaning, and new meaning changes the actions we take. A decision, therefore, is not a one-time event. It is an ongoing cycle, transforming information into meaning, meaning into action, action into learning, and learning into new information. Life, human beings, and AI are all defined by how they realize this continuous process. That is why the question we should truly be asking is not, how intelligent is AI? Instead, we should ask, what kind of decisions is AI capable of making? That question, more than any other, leads us to the true nature of intelligence in the age of AI. Now, let us consider one final question. If AI truly becomes capable of making decisions, will we be able to understand those decisions? AI can process information, it can generate answers, and in the future, it may even develop goals, create meaning, and make decisions based on the situations it encounters. But that alone is not enough. If humans cannot understand why an AI made a particular decision, we cannot truly trust it. Why did it make that decision? What information did it consider? What meaning did it derive? What purpose guided its choice of action? If this process remains invisible, then AI's decision will remain a black box to us. Understanding is the foundation of trust. That is why the goal is not simply to build more intelligent AI. Our goal is to build AI that people can understand, reason with, and trust. And to achieve that, we need a new framework, one that allows us to trace, understand, and share the decision-making process of AI. So, how can this understanding be achieved? Until now, much of AI research has focused on explainable AI, making AI's decisions understandable by explaining them. And of course, that is important. But explanation alone is not enough. What we truly want to understand is, why did the AI arrive at that decision? What events occurred? What information did it receive? What meaning did it derive from that information? What decision was made? How was that decision translated into action? And how was the entire process recorded as part of its history? In other words, what we need is not merely an explanation of the final outcome. We need the ability to trace the entire process through which a decision comes into being. That is why we view AI decision-making as a continuous flow. Event, signal, meaning, decision, execution, log. This is what we call the decision trace. A decision is not a single moment. It is an ongoing process in which information becomes meaning. Meaning becomes a decision becomes action, and the results are carried forward into the future. That is why the decision trace is not a mechanism for monitoring AI. It is a new way of recording intelligence itself, capturing how intelligence engages with the world, creates meaning, and chooses the future. Now, let us look at the decision trace from a more fundamental perspective. It is not merely a business workflow, nor is it simply a blueprint for an AI system. It is a fundamental structure that describes how intelligence engages with the world. Intelligence does not exist inside a closed box. First, something happens in the world. That is the event. That event is then perceived through sensors, perception, or information. That is the signal. But receiving information alone is not enough to constitute intelligence. The information must be connected to purpose, experience, and context, so that meaning can be created. Based on that meaning, intelligence chooses a direction for the future. That is the decision. Every decision is expressed through action. That is execution. The outcome is then recorded and becomes experience for future decisions. That is the log. In other words, the world influences intelligence, and intelligence, in turn, influences the world. Through this continuous cycle, intelligence learns, adapts, and grows. That is why the decision trace model is not a model for AI alone. It describes a universal structure shared by all intelligent beings, life, human beings, and AI alike. It reveals how intelligence continually relates to the world. And by understanding this structure, we can finally begin to design intelligence, build trust in it, and enable humans and AI to coexist within society. Throughout this series, we have been pursuing a single question: what is decision? As we explored that question, one thing became increasingly clear. Intelligence is far more than computational power. Life creates meaning through its relationship with the world. Human beings cultivate meaning through experience, values, and purpose. And AI, too, is beginning to create new meaning through its relationships with people and with its environment. In other words, intelligence does not exist within an individual alone. Humans, AI, the environment, action, learning. When these elements continuously influence one another in an ongoing cycle, meaning emerges, decisions emerge, and the future begins to take shape. The framework that records this cycle, helps us understand it, and carries it forward into future decisions is what we call the decision trace model, and the cycle itself is what we call the intelligence field. That is why the most important question in the age of AI is not, how intelligent is AI? The real question is, how can humans and AI cultivate better intelligence together through their relationships? I believe that this question will become one of the central challenges of AI research in the years ahead. Erwin Schrödinger once asked, what is life? In the age of AI, the question we must ask is, what is intelligence? And if there is one message I hope to leave you with today, it is this. Intelligence is the capacity to create meaning through relationships, to make decisions, to take action, and to continue learning. And that intelligence belongs neither to humans alone nor to AI alone. We have entered an era in which we must design a new intelligence field, one that humans and AI cultivate together. Thank you very much.